Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Make Things Better podcast. Today I have Chris Dymond on the show. And Chris, I've been looking forward to talking to you for quite a while. As I was just saying, you're kind of a bit of a celebrity in my eyes within the digital community in Sheffield. And I'm looking forward to talking to you about smart cities in particular. But before we get into that, can you just tell us a little bit about what you've been up to really over the last few years and the work that you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I guess I'm a celebrity in your eyes because I'm old. That's why I've been around a long time. I've been involved in Sheffield's digital scene for a long time, so a lot of people know me. Yeah, my background is in web development and then design pre-web. Actually, my first job actually in my gap year before I went to university was designing a front end for a bulletin board system for a Swiss telecommunications company. So that was like my first exposure to designing kind of visual software for network applications.
Wow, how long ago was that?
That was 1987. Yeah, 1987. In fact, that piece of software was exhibited at Telecom 87, which is this massive trade show in Geneva. It was the trade show that they launched ISDN. They were like, communications satellites hanging from the ceiling in this auditorium. It was massive. They're like, I think it was 50,000 people at this conference.
No way.
Yeah, it was really big. So this company that I did my gap year with, they had a stand and my software was their pride of place on the stand.
That's pretty cool.
Showing all of their American customers that they could now dial in over a modem to a bulletin board system and download firmware for their networking devices. That's what it was about. They could download the firmware and then burn it onto an EEPROM and put it and swap the chips in their network gateways and stuff like that.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. A lot of that's kind of gone over my head. Is that is that old technology or is it new technology I've just not come across?
Yeah, it's old tech. Okay, it's called different names now, but it's still the same stuff. So
yeah, I've got a little bit of an excuse at least because yeah, I guess it was maybe a bit before my time. I mean, I wasn't even born then, like in '87. That's like exactly 10 years before I was born. But yeah, Chris, what have you been up to since, let's say, March 2020, since like the pandemic started? That's a good sort of time frame.
Yeah, so I guess a lot of people know me as one of the co-founders and directors of Sheffield Digital. So that was taking up a lot of my time. And I'd started doing a little bit of teaching for Sheffield Hallam. I'd done some workshops for them at the back end of 2019, basically kind of digital design workshops, design thinking workshops. But they wanted to give the students real world challenges, and they were using the smart city framework that Mark Gannon and I had kind of devised at the time. And so they were using an article that Mark had written to kind of set the scene for the students, and I was doing some workshops. And then I agreed to do some more teaching in the spring, and then of course lockdown hit and everything went online. So that happened, and then roughly the same time I was invited by an old colleague of mine, or a former colleague of mine, he's younger than me, to do some teaching on a course that he'd started directing for a company called Zigurat, based in Barcelona. They do international master's degrees online in affiliation with the University of Barcelona. So they're accredited by the University of Barcelona. And he asked me if I'd like to do some teaching. And I kind of thought, well, it's probably a good idea, seeing as we're about to go into a lockdown. He literally asked me like 10 days before we went into the first lockdown. I just bought this microphone. I bought a green screen because we were, me and my son, who's now 11, we were going to do some live streams of playing vintage video games because it's a hobby of ours. So I bought all this kit to do that, and then lockdown happened, and I found myself basically teaching from the desk that I'm sat at now. So the course that I teach on at Sheffield Hallam is the Digital Media Management Master's degree, and I teach design thinking in the autumn, so I'm teaching that at the moment, and I teach digital ecosystems analysis in the spring, and then I do project supervisions in the summer. And every intake we've had, they have an intake in September and an intake in January. We've broken the previous record for the number of students on roll every intake we've had, partly because of the pandemic, I guess, because I think more students are staying on in higher education after graduating, but also we're getting a lot of international students. So we currently have, I think, 105 students on roll on the master's course. So it's I think it's the biggest master's course, that postgraduate course that Hallam run.
Yeah, okay, that sounds pretty cool. And how have you found teaching? Have you taught much before, prior to like the pandemic?
No, it's one of the things I've always enjoyed working with people and developing them, right? When you get to a certain point in your career, you're basically hiring people that are younger than you, and you're creating an environment for them to do their best work, and you're you're not, it's not so much you're teaching them, but you're giving them opportunities to learn. You might be putting them on projects and watching them fail and picking them up and making sure that they learn from the experience and stuff like that. But I always enjoyed that. I always enjoyed that aspect of it. That when you're in a team, you're developing the people around you. You're trying to make everybody better. You're trying to make sure that everybody knows what their role is and understands what they're doing and is able to kind of relax into what they're doing, and then get really good at it, and then push it. Keep learning, keep trying new things, and pushing the practice. And I really missed that, because I used to be one of the senior management team at Technophobia back in the day, and I left quite soon after the company was sold, because I wanted to concentrate on other things. And I had two young children at the time. My kids were very little, and they were going to be growing up in Sheffield, and I felt like I needed to try and do something to give them more opportunities here, try and do something for the digital kind of environment in Sheffield. So that's what I was focusing on. But as a result, I was self-employed. I'm a one-man band essentially. I was no longer in that position of mentoring anyone. So I think from that perspective, I'd forgotten how much I really missed that. So it's been incredibly rewarding. I've thoroughly enjoyed being involved in other people's education.
Yeah. So moving on to like smart cities a little bit.
Yeah.
And we were talking yesterday in a meeting, and I was with Alan, our designer at Hive. And I think what he was kind of getting at in a way was that the kind of buzz around the word smart cities has maybe diminished a little bit over the last few years, and it was kind of trendier a few years ago. So I don't know whether that's is that still like the right kind of phrase to use? And what is a smart city, first of all?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Terms are very useful, right? I mean, you want to have terms that are searchable, that allow you to discover information that you can put in Google and get and find stuff with. So it's useful to have a phrase like that has a certain, it's a massively contested meaning, but it's in the right kind of ballpark. There's a kind of a history to the term smart cities, which I don't think is, it's not really worth going into in too much detail, but I think there's like a hard definition and a much softer definition, or a narrow definition and a broader definition. And in terms of its trendiness and buzziness, it really depends where you are in the world. It's very easy to think about these things in terms of, where we're sat right now in the UK or in Europe even, but the idea of smart cities is much newer in other parts of the world. There are a lot of standards around smart cities now that there weren't back then. And so I think maybe the buzz has diminished a little bit, but it's become more meaningful as a term. And people that work in the field, to them, it means something a bit different than it did, 5 or 10 years ago when it first started being used. I think, the narrow conception of smart cities is that it's about that it's about technology, and it's about data and sensing and measurement, and networks that are pulling data where it can be analyzed centrally and acted on. And so it's really the instrumentation of cities. There's this idea of the technopolis, the efficient city, where digital technology is making the city more efficient. So it's making traffic move faster. It's making your bin collections cheaper and more cost effective. So there's a very kind of mechanical idea of what a smart city is. But then there's also this much broader idea of the application of technology for other outcomes. So the impetus in city thinking and planning for a long time has been based on economic imperatives. There's if you look at the history of cities and what has influenced their design and why they've appeared in certain ways, there's been lots of different movements in urbanism, different patterns, street patterns, different types of design enabling different ways of living. And a lot of the design impetus in the 20th century was for cities that were effective at producing industrial output and producing economically. But there are increasingly other things driving city design, particularly sustainability and equity. So smart cities has come to mean for people in the know kind of thing, really the application of not just technology but new methods and approaches to try and produce a set of outcomes that are more holistic, that are not just about economic outcomes, but are about the well-being of citizens and about sustainability and resource use and carbon impact and things like that.
Yeah, so kind of making cities more efficient and better for people who live in them by using a range of new technologies. And then also you have like the things network as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where does that come into things? Because I was looking into smart cities the other day, and then I got into the things network, and
Mm-hmm.
I think I mentioned smart cities yesterday to someone at Hive, and Johnny at Hive, our founder, he mentioned how actually we did have a hub at some point in our Park Hill flats, and that was like connected to the things network. And so I think we did try it out for a brief period of time, but I don't really know too much about that. Can you tell us a little bit about that briefly?
Yeah, sure. So so one aspect of this is what's called the Internet of Things. So the idea that there are different digital communications networks for different types of information and different types of application. So obviously there's Wi-Fi, there's fiber and copper broadband, but then there are other wireless types of wireless network. So chunks of what used to be the television spectrum have been chunked up and sold off to provide other point-to-point communications protocols. And there's a whole bunch of these, and things like the cellular network, including 5G, are also part of that. And some networks are better for certain things and have better bandwidth, and so some of them are designed for very low bandwidth, very long distance, very low energy. Okay, so Things Network is an international community of people that are building what are called LoRaWAN networks. So that's long-range wireless LANs. And this is based on a networking protocol and technology that is extremely low energy and extremely low bandwidth and extremely long distance, which means that you can buy or make a gateway, and you can put it on a pole on the roof of your building, or you can suction it to the window of your office and connect it to power and connect it to network, either wired or a SIM card, and that gateway can support up to 10,000 other devices that can be up to quite a long distance away from it, that are communicating with it. What's called like chirp communication sometimes, because they're really, really small packets of data that you might get a few times a day. So you can use this to build environmental or sensor networks that are telling you something about the environment, and they're used in lots of different contexts, for measuring air quality or measuring water levels or measuring. They're used in rural areas. Obviously, in rural areas, the distances are much greater, because they don't get so much interference from buildings. But you can use them to measure the movement of animals. You can even triangulate and provide equivalent to GPS locations, but for a fraction of the energy cost. Okay, so you could run a sensor. Some estimates are that you could run a sensor on a pair of AA batteries for a decade, with these things.
Am I right in saying that because of the low bandwidth and maybe because of the low energy, they can't really be used for applications that are very fast and very powerful?
No, that's right. So you wouldn't want to use them to stream video. And also there's latency. So there's no like they're engineered to be really, really minimal. Like you've got a few, for the Things Network LoRaWAN devices, that protocol, you've got a few options as to how you communicate. So you can either not care whether a message is received or not, or you can send the message and then wait 3 seconds for a reply, or you can send the message 3 times in a 12-second period and hope that one of them got through, kind of thing, right? So they're used for applications where it's not imperative that you get a message through. So you wouldn't use that particular protocol if you as an early warning system, right? You wouldn't want to send an alert that needs action off the basis of a single message. But what you would have is that you would have a network that sends you a packet of information every time there's some kind of state change.
Right? I think another example I saw was with the parking bays. So you could have it where there's like sensors and it shows whenever a car's left a parking space, and then that sends out a message to tell someone that there's a parking space available, because that sort of thing doesn't change like every minute, does it? No. Like realistically it's going to change quite infrequently throughout a day.
So temperature, pressure, you've got it's both ways though. So it's not just sensing. You can also have actuators. So you can send it's a two-way network. So you can send a message to an actuator which will flip a relay and close a sluice gate, or unlock something, or whatever you need it to do. So there's tons of different applications for this. And the Things Network started in Amsterdam, where they basically crowdsourced 6 gateways to put up over the city to blanket the city in a network. And there's now a community of people all around the world that are building their own community IoT networks, essentially. And so we have one here in Sheffield. It was one of the kind of the outputs from the Urban Flows project. The Sheffield University won some funding for a joint project with Bristol and Newcastle, I think, were the 3 universities, called Urban Flows, and they used some of their kit budget to buy some LoRaWAN gateways. And so I think they run, I haven't spoken to Steve Jupp actually, from Urban Flows for a while, but I think they've got 5 out in the field now. And then there was a bunch of others. You guys had one when you were at Park Hill. The guys at Wandisco had one. The guys at Pimeroni had one. So there is a map, and there is a network. And there was a move to, I don't know if you're aware, but Sheffield has got one of the largest air quality monitoring, citizen science air quality monitoring networks in the country.
Did that have anything to do with the air monitoring and the kind of big news article that came out a few years ago around Hunter's Bar and Hunter's Bar School?
Yeah, so that was related. Yeah, so the guys that are involved in Clean Air for Sheffield, that was one of the outcomes of a consultation that they did, where there was a concern that, you know, at the times that they're taking their kids to school, it's rush hour and the air quality is very poor. And so as a result of that, that led to basically this citizen science effort where what's his name, Graham, invited people into the back room of pubs to build air quality sensors. So for 40 quid a bit, you can build your own air quality monitor, and you can hook it up to your network, and you can start sharing data from wherever you put your monitor to an international air quality data platform called Luftdaten. So you can go to the Luftdaten website and you can see the air quality map across Sheffield. And they ended up putting about, you know, over 100 of these sensors out in the field. Part of what Urban Flows was doing was understanding how to calibrate these cheap, low quality air sensors against the very expensive, high quality air sensors that they had at the university, to see, you know, whether you could trust the data that the citizen scientists were producing, and what, you know, under what atmospheric conditions they were accurate and under what conditions they weren't. And so there was some PhD, there's some doctoral theses run on that, and that's informed other projects around the world. But there's also a movement to convert those original air quality monitors to LoRaWAN, so that they use less energy and could be set up in more places.
Yeah, so using LoRaWAN is more like, it's more energy efficient, but I'm guessing that means it's like much better for the environment as well.
Well, yeah, in a lot of ways, and these are environmental monitors. So the idea is that you can use them to save resources, to make things cheaper and easier. And there are a number of networks across Sheffield. There is actually the council also, along with their partners at Amy and Connexon, run another IoT network. I'm not sure if it's based on LoRaWAN or on a different protocol, but they run one that monitors a lot of the bins, and they've got environmental monitoring in some of the green space and street trees that are monitoring kind of soil and moisture and things like that. So it basically gives them more information to know where they need to go and allocate resources, right? Do they need to go and tend to this area and water it or not? They can tell from looking at their data. It's interesting. We've had some interesting kind of results from it in terms of understanding what kind of waste is produced in different parts of the city, and also things like how heavy it is. So it's actually improved their health and safety, because there are certain areas that tend to produce heavier waste than others, and they can make sure that they have enough people going to those areas to remove it. But there's obviously lots of issues around waste and fly tipping and things like that. But yeah, they introduced the system. I run a meetup series called Smart Sheffield, and we had the guys that run that network come and talk to us about it about a year ago, actually. So those videos from their talk are available on the smartsheffield.city website if you're interested in this kind of thing. But this is, as I said, this is the very kind of instrumental end of smart cities. Yeah, actually instrumenting the city and getting actionable data from it that improves the service you can provide to citizens, but reduces costs and you know, allows you to optimize things that have been very inefficient previously.
Yeah, everything that you said so far about smart cities sounds like good. Like, it just does sound like it'd be beneficial really to people. And like when we're talking about Sheffield, like, yeah, it sounds like that'd benefit people in Sheffield. Are there any kind of disadvantages in your opinion, or is there anything to be scared of as well?
I mean, so it's a very broad thing, right? And it depends. There are negative externalities from a lot of things, and it depends what use the data is put to, right? So that there are issues in terms of data bias. There are issues in terms of the data that you use to make decisions on. So there's a big chunk of the smart city agenda is about urban design and planning and using more data in that and modeling. And so the quality of the data and the type of data you use to do that is really important, right? If you're only using data from from part of the population, and there are populations and communities that are excluded because they're not producing any data because they have fewer mobile phones, and you're using mobile phone location data, for example, you'll end up with biases that then are inherent in the designs that you produce, and you end up producing cities that only work for these people and not for those other people, and that's a bad thing. Okay, so there's a bunch of things around that people need to be aware of, and that policymakers need to be aware of. Obviously, there needs to be some strategic oversight and strategic objectives as to what the purpose of these technologies are. The thing that bothers me is the governance side of it, and the idea that cities are implementing these things because it's being sold to them, or because their partners and contractors are using these technologies, and there's no governance oversight over it. And a lot of these technologies do involve data that belongs to citizens. It's citizen data. Some of it's maybe not personal data as you'd think of it, but there needs to be data oversight. And obviously the law is catching up on this, and these systems need to be compliant, but they also should be interoperable. You should be avoiding lock-in. You should have access to that data. If you as a city are commissioning services and technology that is gathering data, then partly that some of that data belongs to the citizens, but also it should be made available to the city for other uses, or at least for some kind of oversight. And there's lots of issues around that, and there's been lots of examples. There's some famous examples where some of this data was leaked. Well, not so much leaked, but there's kind of there's the ability to de-anonymize data that is supposedly anonymized or pseudonymized when it's made available. So there are situations like New York, quite a few years ago now, released all of their taxi data, all of their licensed taxi data, anonymized to an open data platform. So you could go and look at taxi trips, and you could, the data set omitted anything that was personally identifiable, but it kept the route, the door-to-door route, and it kept the fare, and it also kept whether or not the person had provided a tip, or what proportion of the fare was made up of tip, right? But people very quickly realized that if you knew roughly where a celebrity lived, and you knew where they were playing on a certain night, where they would be on a certain night, and you could identify the taxi journey that took them there from the area of the city they lived in, you could then see whether or not they tipped. And they literally broke down a bunch of celebrities and identified who were the good tippers and who weren't by name.
Yeah, no way. That's a great example, actually. And it's I think that's like probably what scares some people, is that fear that they're not really going to have control over their own data. Yeah. And like you've had that a lot on social media in the past as well, with people fearing about, and I mean some people obviously rightfully fearing about their data going to whoever. I think one important point you made, which I totally agree with, is about how you use that data and try and avoid any biases, because what I always think about is like humans are innately biased in many ways. Like we have psychological biases, we just do. And so whatever data we create, and whatever formulas we use, often they are going to be biased in one way or another. So I can definitely see why that would be a real challenge. And yeah, I guess people are just kind of scared about their privacy, but
Yeah.
it's a hard one to weigh up. The other thing I'd probably want to consider, or maybe ask you, is like, how do people kind of get more involved in knowing what's going on with all of this and actually making like a decision themselves? Because from my perspective, it doesn't really seem fully democratic in a way, because like most people wouldn't really know about these decisions being made. So I guess that might be another concern for some people when it comes to like smart cities and these technologies being implemented.
Yeah, I mean, which was partly what, you know, running the Smart Sheffield meetup series was about.
Mm.
You know, to try and, you know, get some of these projects more widely known, get them on record, you know, get them on video so people can go and actually, you know, listen to what's going on and why these things are happening. I think partly one of the promise of this is for a more equitable city, for a city that is more more engaged, where there's more participation, where there's more distributed decision making. So, you know, there's lots of examples in other cities of things like you know, collective budgeting, you know. So, and it was one of the things that was part of that web strategy that we developed for the city back in 2009. Was one of the major components was educating people about what the local authority is, educating people about the city, because I just felt it was missing. And I think my concern, and the concern of a lot of people at the time, was that cities were becoming more important, but city authorities were becoming less relevant. And the things that were becoming relevant to people were social media and, you know, these other platforms that the local authority was just, it couldn't compete for attention and usability. And it, you know, it was, you know, people's relationship to their city was becoming a transactional one, where you only need to engage with the local authority, where you need to go through some process, you know.
That's a
And
really interesting point, by the way. And I think like that is something I've not really thought about too much, but is like so true in my life personally. Like I'm currently in Manchester. I was raised in Sheffield, and I went to Hunters Bar. That's why I brought it up, because that story stood out to me because I went to that school. But anyway, like, yeah, just in Manchester, the only really connection I ever have with the council here, or like any governance of this city, is literally just me paying my taxes. That's kind of it.
Yeah.
Whereas like it's kind of weird that physically this is where I live, and yet most of my time is spent, probably like more time anyway, is spent on like maybe online, on social media, in different spaces, completely disconnected to where I live. But anyway, carry on, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's still a massive problem. I think it's a huge problem. And I think there's a lot of money being spent on sensor networks and telecommunications networks and data platforms and, you know, predictive analytics, to keep our streets cleaner and to keep the city lit and traffic moving and all of those things. But there's very, very little being spent on educating people about how to democratically engage, and opportunities for them to really learn about how the city actually works, how it really works. You know, I mean, you ask the majority of people and they wouldn't be able to tell you even the basic parameters of local elections, and, you know, which ward they're in, and how many councillors each ward gets, or anything like that. You know, kind of the just the basic representational structure. It's irrelevant to most people. It doesn't really have any connection with their lives. And so there was, you know, there's a bunch of stuff about transparency and communications and opening up decision making Obviously, we've just had a big change, a public referendum in Sheffield last year to change the way that that decisions are made and to make them more open. But you know, a lot of cities only go so far, right? So you need to go the extra bit in order to make the difference. So it's not good enough to broadcast or record a council meeting, right? So imagine you've got a council meeting going on in the council chamber at the and you televise it. You put cameras in there. You can stream it online, much cheaper than you used to be able to do, and people can go and watch it. And you do that, and lo and behold, 5 people watch it, right? Out of a city of 600,000 like we have, because no one's got the time to sit and watch this stuff. If you've got the time to do it, you might as well actually go to the town hall and watch it in person. But what's important is what is being discussed. And so that content of people discussing these issues in a public forum, it needs to be atomized, it needs to be chopped up. Alexa kicking off.
It's so annoying that it's called Alexa, because my partner's called
Don't say that.
Alexa.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a nightmare. We went to this party the other week and literally walked in and they had some music playing, and I didn't know. No, my partner hadn't met most of the people at this party before because it was my friends, and I was introducing her, and I go, "Hey everyone, this is Alexa." And just that moment, the music stops because the music was connected by a Alexa speaker. And then for the rest of the night, that sort of thing just kept on happening every time I said her name. It's so annoying. But anyway, sorry about that.
I think there wasn't a class action in France brought by people whose name was Zoe against Renault and their new car.
Really?
Yeah, I think I remember something about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a weird one because I'm guessing like in the future, no one's ever going to be called Alexa.
Stop saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so so that information needs to be chopped up, and it needs to be tagged, and it needs to be discoverable. So if you're interested in Hunters Bar School, you want to know every time Hunters Bar was mentioned in a council chamber session over the last 5 years, right? If there's some planning thing going on, you want to be able to educate yourself so that you understand the issue and the process. Otherwise, you've just got people coming in with no knowledge and varying voices of varying loudness, and there's some very loud voices on social media, but there's very little. Initially, actually, from the council, there was very little desire to engage at all. It was better not to say anything and just not concern yourself. But I always felt that there was a responsibility, a civic duty of the local authority to present information, to give citizens the information that they need in order to be part of the discussion and to be part of decision making. And that you can't just leave it to the press. The press, God knows, the press we're under and still are being ripped apart by the new medium, especially local press, and they still haven't discovered a business model to replace the old one, because the old business model was propped up through classified adverts, and that market has been taken. So it's kind of the responsibility of the local authority to provide good information and accurate information, and it needs to do more to empower and enable other actors in the city to take that information and to turn it into media and to turn it into information, to make sure that the general population has better knowledge at their disposal to make decisions and to participate in these discussions.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is data that the local authority itself is producing, the discussions it has, and it's not good enough anymore just to put it in minutes and have it as a PDF somewhere buried in a website that nobody's going to visit.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that idea about having tags so that you can like search somewhere. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah, but even that was just part of it. You need to be notified. Like, here are the tags. So it's not just about semantics. It's about having a gazetteer as well, right? So a whole set of local phrases that mean something here in the city, people, places, things that have meaning here that you can use to bring up, set of references that are tagged with those things, but also to notify you of. So whenever that thing is discussed, so next time that Hunters Bar School is discussed in any local authority forum that's relevant, that you get a notification of it. You get an email saying it's been discussed. Do you want to see what this new piece of information is?
Yeah, and I think all of that is so key to kind of the evolution, or whatever you want to call it, of smart cities.
Yeah.
Because otherwise there's just going to be a disconnect between those people in the city and whoever's making these big changes, which are actually going to have an impact on people's lives. And that's where that feeling of that lack of control, that those feelings are going to come from. And that's why there could be pushback against initiatives which actually could be really great for a city, really environmentally friendly, saving money, efficient, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we saw something very similar like to this happen in Toronto, just over the last 5 years or so. So I'm not going to go into all of the details of it, but Sidewalk Labs, which is an Alphabet subsidiary, sister company to Google, were hired by the city of Toronto to be their innovation partners to the joint venture they set up to redevelop part of the waterfront. They tried to do that job, but there was a huge amount of distrust, and they couldn't answer questions about how citizens' data was going to be treated properly. And there was a huge amount of pushback, and some of that pushback was perfectly justified. It's fascinating. It's still rolling on, even though Sidewalk Labs pulled out of the project May last year. But yeah, that's a case in point. I mean, I think people are very disconnected, and I think there's a vast majority of people who are disconnected, and there's a small minority of people who are massively engaged. Like, and when that happens in a social media world where everybody's surrounded by an information environment that they help curate, the people that are engaged keep building more and more. They keep constructing their information environment, and the algorithms that recommend things to them keep using that to feed back, and so it becomes all enveloping. And so the people who are engaged are not just a bit educated in it, they're like massively educated in it. Like the ability of social media and digital media to accelerate someone's learning and someone's knowledge about a subject is enormous. You can accelerate people way past what we would traditionally think of as being a normal set of knowledge. People used to have a certain set of knowledge about a lot of things, and now increasingly people have got very little knowledge about a lot, many things, most things, vastly most things, and an incredible amount of knowledge about very, very small number of things. And I think that creates a very difficult environment to share commonalities and to agree or account for other people's level of knowledge. It's very, very difficult to be empathic enough to predict and build a mental model of how much someone knows about a subject.
Yeah,
in this kind of environment.
Absolutely. And I think kind of on that point, maybe a slight tangent from that point, is that on social media you have kind of like the polarization of opinions. So as you say, like the algorithms will only provide you information on things that you already agree with. So like one example was with 5G, that's like a big kind of part. And then you have 6G sort of I think that's being developed now as well. So yeah, you have some people who are 100% against 5G, and I found that quite interesting because I was like looking and reading and watching videos on YouTube and across other social media platforms, and people saying why 5G is so dangerous. And then I found some resources that were like, well, yeah, actually 5G is just it's safe basically, and you know, backed up by tons of science and very logical. I kind of went through a journey myself upon reading different people's opinions and researching it myself. And you know, I kind of at one point I was like, oh, this actually could be quite dangerous because I was reading certain content, right? And then I read and watched some other videos and I was like, oh, okay, well, that actually supports my initial opinion, which is that it's totally safe, because some of that information had been totally taken out of context. So, you know, about like it being used in, I think, in the army in America, that kind of thing. But then the context of that, when you actually discover the context of that, it's like, well, yeah, okay, that's fine, because I think they were using it in, you know, like aiming some rays in a certain way directly onto people, which is 5G would never be used like that, you know. And that was really interesting to me. And I also started to think about the psychology behind it as well. And like, that's a huge thing, because as we said on a podcast very recently, you have like the amygdala, which is, you know, it's always trying to seek out problems and fear. It's very fearful, right? So if you're to read that content initially where there's a lot of confirmation bias going on as to why 5G could be dangerous, which is mostly made up, you can see how psychologically that could have like a scary sort of impact, and it can fire up like amygdala. But you have to just do some more research yourself. But anyway, so I think you were gonna say a few things on those points there, weren't you?
Yeah, no, the issue is that it's exploitable, right? That kind of knowledge environment is really, really exploitable. It's a really dangerous environment because there's a whole range of bad actors that will exploit it, and part of it is exploited algorithmically, unintentionally, just through basically, kind of a capitalist logic of increasing engagement. Engagement equals money on platforms. So engagement is the key metric that social media platforms use. And what is the most engaging content? It's the stuff that makes you afraid, or the stuff that is controversial. And so there's kind of that baked in, but then it's also really, really exploitable, because you've got grifters and people that make money from content and from selling supplements. And there's usually a sideline, there's usually something that hooks people in and wins their confidence. But it's very easy to con them because they can control the narrative and only show one particular viewpoint, and any counterfactual information is immediately squashed. And the motivation to do that is financial, and it's kind of a standard thing. Also, the kind of thing that the foreign states that are trying to gain control or influence elections, or influence public opinion, or sow chaos generally, or it's a very, very cheap way. Exploiting it is a very cheap way of creating damage and weakening an adversary's position. So there's a whole geopolitical aspect of this that's playing out across social media, and people are complete victims of it. And so I think that concerns me a lot. The ability of citizens, especially some of the kind of the most marginalized and excluded people in society. A lot of the concern is to make sure that they can access the services they need to via the internet. Got benefit services that now require internet access, in order to access social services and local authority services. You need to be able to transact online, especially during COVID, when people couldn't go into libraries, and there was the assisted digital services were shut down for a while. It's much harder to access services. So there's a lot of movement to getting people online, and if you can just get them the internet, then they can access the services, and all the data about how much they could save in domestic utility bills and how they could, be able to find work more easily and all these benefits. But it's actually those are benefits that come from an old way of thinking about the internet, and actually what you're also exposing them to is a huge amount of misinformation and people trying to con them out of money, or trying to manipulate their opinions so that they act and vote in a certain way. And I think that's really dangerous. So to me, a smart city is not just one in which people have the skills to use computers, but also have a much more sophisticated sense of knowledge and media.
Yeah. One thing that I've learned this year, and probably something that I've thought about quite a lot, and I guess this was perhaps provoked in some sense by my podcast with Gemma Milne, who wrote a book called Hype and Smoke and Mirrors, and it was all about hype in society and how dangerous that is, really.
Right.
It was really interesting, and what I think one of the main purposes of that book was actually to be a big advocate, really, for critical thinking, which is so important. And yeah, I think a lot of these issues, if people could think more critically, or were taught the skills to think critically, but it's not necessarily people's fault if they're not thinking critically. And I think we can all be very, it's very easy to just fall into like long-lasting subconscious patterns of thought where we don't actually think as in depth as we'd like because of our automatic biases or whatever else. But all of that can contribute to ultimately bad decisions being made, and maybe impulsivity and so on. And just along those lines, and bringing it back to smart cities, do you think humans at this point within our very capitalist society, are we ready to like start to implement all of these new technologies, despite knowing that we can be very we can cause a lot of damage through technology, like we have done via social media? So like the purpose, I'm sure, of social media at first was not to cause this polarization throughout society, and it's like, well, at first smart cities sound amazing, but right now, are we ready to do that?
Yeah, well, I think we're certainly learning very quickly. Yeah, what would have taken generations to learn, I think, I'm in my 50s now, and I remember obviously a pre-internet time. I remember when computers were first arriving in homes, and now I've got two kids that are growing up with technology and connectivity all around them, and they I'm hoping, but I'm certainly aware that not everyone is going to grow up like that, and in this next generation, and it's going to take a while. I mean, I've been watching this happen for ages, and it doesn't, people, a lot of it is not the technology, right? A lot of it is people's behavior and what they know and whether they really understand what's going on, right? Like if someone likes your tweet, is that really a person, or is it is it automated? Is it a bot? Is it a sock puppet? Does that account, is that one of 40 accounts that all belong to the same person or the same social media team? There's very, very little, we as digital professionals don't put very much credence in that stuff, right? We kind of know from our exposure to it what could be happening. We don't, and it's all a bit of a game. It's all a bit of a, we know it's not real, but to people that don't, they take it at face value, and or a lot of people do tend to, and why wouldn't they? And the dopamine hit that they get from people responding to them, and for them having a voice maybe when they didn't have a voice before, is real. That experience they have is real. So I think it's going to take quite a long time for people to adapt to it, but I think like as humans, if we look back through history in terms of whether we've been wise in our deployment of new technologies, I don't think it's any accident that the first atomic bombs were used within a few years of inventing the things. So I think added to which, right, that there's the continual like chain throughout human history of millennialism, and the idea that the end of the world is near, and we're the chosen people who are going to be saved by it all, and everybody else is going to die hideously, and that makes us feel good, and it makes us good to think about that. and God, just the blessed relief of it being all over, and finally we're significant because our generation is the ones that experience the end of the world. History does not bear that out at all. Like we're a rolling disaster that is moving through time, wrecking things and trying to stitch it together and keep some kind of sense of purpose and togetherness and hope. And I don't see any reason why that isn't going to keep on happening generation after generation, where as we adapt to climate change, as maybe we develop the technologies to recover, as whatever we do, whatever you kind of I think humanity's been hanging on by its fingernails for thousands of years, and I don't think that's really going to stop. But that's the fight that we're in, and so you might as well spend your time you've got here fighting for what you consider to be the right side.
Yeah, that's some really great thoughts there, Chris. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's interesting to hear. It's gone very deep. I think this is probably the deepest podcast I've recorded in a long time. So it's almost like I need a few seconds to collect my thoughts again. But no, I think we'll go back to Sheffield. We'll go back a bit local with my next question.
Okay.
What technology do you think could be used to improve Sheffield?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So like in answering your last question, you say, are we ready for the technology kind of thing? There are a lot of technologies that I think we are ready for, right? There's a lot of areas in which we can use technologies and data to make a real difference. And so you could look at an area. I mean, one of the companies that I love the concept. I love what they're doing, and they're a Sheffield company, and they're a great name. They're called District Heating, right? One of the things about Sheffield that people don't realize or realize enough is that we have one of the largest heat networks in the country, one of the largest district heating systems in the whole of Europe, actually, because we started putting pipes in the ground and connecting up public buildings back in the 80s and connecting them to sources of heat, including the incinerator. So, a large proportion of Sheffield's waste, it gets burnt. And there are issues about that in terms of air quality and pollution levels. And there's been lots of, issues with our recycling. It's one of the reasons why we don't recycle as much plastic as other cities do, is because some of that plastic is used for feedstock. It helps keep the incinerator hot enough. So there are things, things around waste management that most people in Sheffield probably aren't really aware of. But one of the things that it does do is it produces a lot of heat, and that heat heats the water in the district heating system, and that heats, I think it's over 2,000 public council houses or council flats, and about 180 public buildings. So from Hallamshire Hospital to the town centre to the workstation, they're heated essentially for free by the waste heat that the city produces in burning its waste. And also, I think it's connected also to some forges. So there's some industrial heat that is piped into the district heating system. I think E.ON's bioreactor. So E.ON built a biofuel reactor where Tinsley Towers used to be. So they demolished the cooling towers at Tinsley and built that energy facility there. That also, I think that has a heat network, and there was a plan to connect the two up. I'm not sure if that actually happened, but there's a lot of heat. And so one of the things about this heat system is that in order for the heat to flow optimally, you need to make sure that it sheds therms, right? It sheds energy, so that it's almost like a potential difference, right? So it needs to be, you need to get rid of the heat in the network so that it pulls through at an optimal speed. So at various points along the network, it actually sheds heat. It hasn't got any use for it, it just sheds it. But that heat is really useful, right? You can use that heat and you can use you can also deliver carbon dioxide through the network as well. And both heat and carbon dioxide is used in farming. So if you can create a network that optimizes where you locate urban farms to produce fresh produce, you not only reduce your supply, your supply chain costs and carbon footprint, because you're producing more food locally for local consumption. You're converting heat and CO2 that already exists in the system. But you're in the process of doing that, you're also making the heat network itself more efficient and saving money. So it's literally that there is energy being wasted in the ecosystem that could be used to grow food, and grow food at quite some scale. And so there's a small company called District Eating that maps heat networks and public land and identifies good sites to build urban farms that can tap into the waste heat and CO2 that's available in those networks, and calculates how much of an improvement that will make to the district heating system by venting those things at that point in the network.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive bit of like how do people even discover these things? That's just, it sounds so smart to me, I guess. It's an episode about smart cities, but yeah, that does sound pretty smart to me. Like, I've just not come across or heard about any of these any of this tech before.
Yeah, I mean one of the great joys I have actually of teaching on this international program is that the kind of the ethos we have, the conception of smart cities that we have, is a very holistic one. So to us, it's about the application of technology, not just for efficiency's sake, but also for sustainability and for equity. And so we look at best practices, we look at the latest thinking and technologies in each of these areas, and how they can be harnessed and how they can make an impact. And so I'm now the academic director of that program. I have 20 international experts that are teaching on it. It's a year-long master's program. We're starting the next program next week. I've literally got my inaugural lecture next Thursday. I've got about 50 students from all around the world that are joining. They're going to be part of the program for a year. They get 2 lectures a week and assignments, and yeah, we're training kind of it's the average age of student on our course is 37. Well, was 37 last year. So these are mid-career professionals that have worked in a particular area for a while, whether it's architecture or software or public administration or community activism, and they're looking to broaden their understanding. They're looking to become more strategic. They're looking to connect to a network of practice and thinking that is going to help them develop projects that they can apply in their own cities, whether they're in Cape Town or in Mumbai or in Bangkok or Medellin or wherever they are in the world. And we have students from all of those cities and many more. So yeah, that's what it's about. We're trying to. These are not things that the general population are aware of, but they're things that practitioners are developing and starting to understand. And so there are many more examples of great new technologies to change the way that we eat, the way that we move, the way that we use energy, the way that we learn, all of those things.
I bet it's really enjoyable for you to learn so much about what's going on in so many different places across the world as well.
Yeah, it really is. It's fantastic. And I set, we try and set assignments so that our students do research in the places that they are, so we can find out more about what's going on in them. So yeah,
that's really cool. I saw that. I read that blog not long ago, and it was about what's going on in loads of different cities. I think you wrote it. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was dead interesting actually. So
it was probably the Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge I was
Yeah, yeah.
using examples of how different projects can try and affect positive change in multiple areas at once.
Yeah,
I
that
was
was it.
that one
That
at the
was
moment.
it. Yeah, it was dead interesting. Right, I've got 3 questions left. All right. So what are the main attractions to working in Sheffield in like the digital scene?
Well, it's really friendly, right? There's lots of people that are willing to talk, willing to chat. There are people that are always willing to kind of do stuff. Like, it's always been the case. If anybody's ever wanted to do stuff, you can usually find other people that will help you do it. And I don't think that's the same everywhere. I think I think Sheffield, there's more people coming into our community all the time, right? I was just saying yesterday, I was looking at the Sheffield Digital Slack, and there's a bunch of people who I don't know talking to each other and answering each other's questions. And I'm like, I've no idea who these people are. I don't know if they've just moved to the city, or whether they've been here all along, or they're just starting out in their careers or anything like that. But that's great. That's what Sheffield Digital was really set up to do. It was to try and give people a way of meeting each other and talking to each other, and supporting our meetups and finding out what's going on and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's great. I think Sheffield, there's a lot of people that work in tech here, and there's there's only a small proportion of those that are really engaged and involved, which is absolutely fine, obviously. But there's a lot of people that are watching. There's a lot of people that are that are around. It's been really great to kind of go back to the city centre and to see it come back to life again after COVID, because a lot of the tech scene here is based within a 20-minute walk, right? It's really compact within the ring road, from St Mary's Gate, where Twinkle are, to the Wicker, where the Flow are. You can walk across the entire city in half an hour. So it's easy to meet people for a coffee. It's, I often, when people come and want to kind of find out about the tech scene in Sheffield, politicians sometimes, or investors, or companies that are thinking about setting up here, they get the presentations and stuff from the council and from the inward investment team and stuff like that, and they get taken out to the AMRC and all this kind of stuff usually. But if I get a chance to meet them, I'll suggest that we meet in a coffee shop somewhere, either in city centre or Tampa or somewhere, and I'll say, well, let's get some coffees to go, and I'll just go for a walk. Like, I'll just go for a tour. Let's just spend half an hour walking around, and I'll point out where everyone is, what's going on there. That building there has got these companies, they do that. Did you know that? All this kind of stuff. And it really wakes people up. I think people go away with a sense that there's just an absolute ton of stuff going on in Sheffield, which there is.
Yeah, I think that density is quite nice as well, because
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I personally love about Sheffield the most. So as I've said, I live in Manchester now, but my family, my partner, most of my friends, and my football team and everyone else is in Sheffield. So I'm there all the time, like football matches, seeing family, seeing friends, whatever. And yeah, that's what I always love about going back home, is I just walk everywhere. Whereas in Manchester, it's like, yeah, I don't know, it's just so big. It's almost like London here in Manchester. I just find it almost too big, and like you can't really walk from one end of the city to another. Whereas in Sheffield, I'll literally walk from like even the Peak District to town. Like you can do that. It's obviously it's a bit of a trek, but I think next month, in a few weeks, either doing that walk from the station out to the Peak District for Sai. And that is one great thing about Sheffield, is you can really just walk everywhere.
It really is the outdoor city. I think the balance, that lifestyle balance, is fantastic. Or just walk along the canal out to Meadowhall. It's a beautiful walk. There's a sort of, I can't remember what it's called, there's like a Three Waters walk or something like that. It's like,
I know which one you're on about. Is that the one with the cycle path as well? Because me and my dad did that. I think that was one of my biggest ever cycle rides when I was younger, like about 12 or 13, and we did that. It was a good day out. But yeah, and relating that back to smart cities as well, though, like I think before this chat, one thing that kind of concerned me a little bit was that all of that like natural scenery that you get in Sheffield, which I think is amazing, and like the parks as well. So I love Endcliffe Park. That's just by me back home, and the Peak District and Forest Dam and everything else. So like I guess with smart cities, from the videos I've watched, it almost just seems all a bit too urbanized without the natural scenery as well. But I feel like from our conversations, I've got a new perspective of it in a way. It's more about the environmental side, and it's more about efficiency and to serve the citizens, really,
Yeah.
rather than about just technology being there for the sake of technology being there. I guess it's more about trying to find ways to actually build upon what's already existing in a city, right?
Yeah, well, all cities are different, and they have their own needs and they have their own challenges, and there's lots of parts of the world, lots of parts of the world are undergoing incredibly fast urbanization. They've got rural populations that are moving to cities, and those cities' ability to provide services is really constrained. You've got cities in some parts of the world that are being built from scratch. Places like Masdar in Dubai, and Songdo in South Korea. These are kind of like bespoke new cities, right? Sort of built on these technological with these visions of how people are going to live. And we have different challenges than that, right? We have an old city. We have a city that needs to be retrofitted. We have roads that are clogged with vehicles that have no cycle infrastructure. We have a third of our city boundary or city area is national park. How do we preserve that? How do we enhance that? I think the council, I read that they look after 800 individual pieces of green space across the city, which is a huge number. Obviously, we've had the whole tree felling debacle in the city. How do we look after our urban forest better? So I think, to me, it's not that there's no single vision of a smart city, right? It's not like that all cities they're all migrating to this vision of the future, right? It's about understanding what is available to us to enhance what we've got and solve the challenges we face here, or we face in this place or that place, that is unique to this place.
And I think that's probably one of the challenges, again, with like social media and the content that you consume online, because it often will present a one-size-fits-all approach. So any of the videos I've watched on smart cities, they're all kind of presenting a similar vision for a smart city. But as you say, that's like a new vision, but it's not based on a previous city that already exists.
I started collecting videos like that, like videos that present a vision of the future. Like there's this, I find them fascinating. Vision of the future videos. I've got a pin board. If anyone wants to find where my pin board is, I've got a Future Visions pin board where I've chucked loads of these videos of mainly corporate imaginings of what our future is going to be like, enhanced by technology. And I think it's a fascinating starting point for discussion about this stuff, because they all look fucking dystopian to me.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I honestly could not agree more. Yeah, they look horrible. But what I found quite comforting was reading the comments who basically said what you just said then. So a lot of people shared that opinion, fortunately. So yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, the future is created by people, and if people don't think that those visions are good, then hopefully they won't be created.
So, but this is the question, Tom, right? The real question is, what kind of technological future would the people of Sheffield make? That's the real question. Not what is Sheffield going to become if it adopts technologies that are produced by people outside, but what future would we make? What would Sheffield's smart city be?
Yeah, exactly. And like,
what
people
would that technology
Sheffield
look like? What would the experience be like of that?
And obviously, like, I know that's more of a rhetorical question, but I think just off the top of my head, like, people in Sheffield, it's kind of based on being, it's like a friendly green city. Like, they're probably the two best adjectives I could use for Sheffield off the top of my head. So that's what hopefully we'd use technology to build upon. And enhance even further. Anyway, final question for you, Chris. And it's been really good talking to you. So what can people do to make things better? It's the most broad of questions, but I love asking people this.
That's a really good one. I think there's so many options for people to find something that they want to change. I think everybody needs to find something they want to change. I think then it's, you know, if you can find that, if you can decide that that's the thing that I want to change or I want to do, then, you know, then work towards that. Find out as much as you can about it. Find other people that are interested in it and want to help you do it. And it's amazing what you can do. Like there's almost, it's amazing what you can do just as a private individual. It's amazing how much change that you can affect if you know, if you want to really get to grips with something. You know, you can set organizations up, you can start projects, you can build applications. You know, we have so much power as developers and people that understand how to use this technology to create things that can make a difference. And so I see examples of people doing that. You know, whether it's, you know, there was a couple of women who wanted to understand playgrounds, for example, because it wasn't clear what facilities were available in the playgrounds across Sheffield. So they created a map where you can go and you can add information about what there is in the playground that's near you. And you know, you've got, you know, for parents who, you know, for whom that is useful information, that's really useful. There was a similar map application for places to breastfeed in town, for example, and there's another one for where you can go to the loo. You know, there's or you know, or whether it's, you know, that you want to be more politically engaged, or whether you want to, you know, I think almost the problem is that there's too many opportunities and too many things to concern yourself with, and it's too easy to do nothing and to be distracted by everything. And so I think, you know, if people wanted to make a difference, there's literally nothing stopping them from making a difference. I think all you maybe need to do is find something that really pisses you off and do something about it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think like a lot of meaning and purpose can be found in that, like finding something that you want to change and actually taking action. That right away is how you know, that's amazing for the soul and just the mind and everything else, I'm sure. So yeah, cheers for coming on, Chris. I really appreciate your time. It's been a really interesting discussion, at least for me. Hopefully listeners have found this interesting as well. Where can people find you and maybe get involved in the Sheffield digital community?
Yeah, well, go to sheffield.digital, have a look at what we do there. We're basically a media platform that kind of communicates about what's going on in tech and digital media across Sheffield. We have a Slack community, so you can go to the you can sign up or fill out a little form explaining who you are, and you can join our community on Slack, where I think there's close to 2,000 people have registered there so far, and there's at least several hundred that use it regularly. There's about 100 different channels for all sorts of different topics that you might want to get involved in. We're a membership organization, so if you want to join us as an individual member, you can, and you then become eligible to join our mentorship program. So we're running a mentoring program for people who join as individual members, and then we also have company members that support us, and we provide kind of business networking and opportunities and stuff like that to our company members. So if any companies want to get involved in policy making and kind of shaping the future of the digital tech and media industry in Sheffield, then come and talk to us about it. And then we run, you know, events, and obviously we advertise all the meetups that are happening in Sheffield and other events. And I run a thing called Geek Breakfast every Friday morning, both online and also in Tampa, Sellers Wheel, which is just a drop-in networking breakfast. So if you're ever around and want to have a chat or come and introduce yourself and meet other people, just come down to Tampa on a Friday morning from 9 o'clock and say hello.
Yeah, cheers, Chris. I'm sure I'll see you there sometime soon as well. All right, thanks a lot. Thanks to everyone listening. I hope you have enjoyed the podcast, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.